we will be talking about the importance of a church website in the age of social media. My name is Peter Frank. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager of Church Supplies for Concordia Publishing House. I've been with the publishing house for about 10 years now. I've been with Concordia Technology Solutions for half of that, and Church Supplies has kind of expanded. So I get to work directly with church offices and any of the products that are bought as the church as an entity. Now, one of our products is a church website builder called Church 360 Unite, and that's been a joy to work on for me because I've been doing church websites since I was 12. I helped my church launch our first one back in the late 90s, and so it's been fun to see how it's evolved, and as social media has kind of taken over, I hear more and more negativity around church websites and whether it's truly important, and the answer absolutely is yes. We're going to talk about that. So can social media replace your church website? Short answer for that is no, and it shouldn't. And we're going to talk about the importance of why that is throughout these different steps. So the church website is such a key thing. As we go to communicate with churches, I've noticed this trend of smaller churches especially not being able to manage both a website and a Facebook account. And a lot of what we'll be talking about today is Facebook, because that's the most prominent one. And it's really the one where you have a hub. So while I don't want to ignore the other social media channels, when I talk Facebook, that's the primary social media tool that we're talking about today. So our goals for this discussion: first off, talk about the challenges of social media and go through some of those. We've got a number of things to discuss with that, but also the benefits of the websites. And I really want to talk through that on the more positive side. We'll talk about why it might seem like I'm down on social media at the end. And like I mentioned, I just led a whole session on Facebook, so I'm absolutely not down on social media. But the benefits of the website, really talking about the positive side of things, the role of each and where they play into your church communications. So the first thing I want to talk about today is customization and branding. First off, before I go too far, how many of you have a church website? I was hoping that it would be everybody. Good, so I don't have to justify the benefits of it. How many of you have a Facebook page? All right, good. So you guys are right in what I was thinking. I was figuring it was going to be the both and. So customization and branding, I think, is a key thing. That's what we're talking about this first because it's the most obvious difference between Facebook page and a church website. So Facebook is very limited in what you can do in branding, whereas websites are not. With websites, you are limited to your skill level or your platform in terms of how you can customize it. But in the broad scope of things, really, you are it's limitless with websites. So here's my church's Facebook page, which is nice. We've got the logo, the picture of the church on there, all the relevant details. This is a picture of our church's website. It's much more customized to our branding. You can see the color scheme is implemented in there. We've got the footer that fits in that. We had one of my coworkers at CPH is actually a member of our church and put this together, so I always like showing this off. We get to have a very unique presence for our website that is easily customizable to meet our needs. Whereas if on our Facebook page, it fits everything. You always will have the Facebook information there. This data is always structured in the exact same way. So on your church website, being able to put your logo, put your images, set up your navigation, choose what sites you have in there is key. Your website can better represent your church. And so as you think about your church in the scope of more historical, if you are in an older building, if you have an older congregation, your ministries are more targeted to a certain demographic versus a younger, more contemporary church, you can have the website fit that to meet your needs. So if you're showing off your worship services, you're going to have a different feel. I've noticed some very modern looking websites for some very liturgical churches, and it seems to kind of contrast the tone of that. With your website, you can really target it in that way. On your Facebook account, you've got one path, and that's not sufficient. Less work does not equal better. One of the positives of social media in terms of setting up a page for your site is that it's very structured. You don't really have to think. You answer the questions, you place it in there. With a website, it's a big project, and if you've ever gone through a website redesign where you did it really well, you'll understand that it's a month-long process. It requires lots of planning. In order to do it right, you have to think through all of the different decisions and make those calls. So I think a lot of times when churches tend to lean more towards the social media, it's because of the amount of work involved. Facebook is meant for everybody to be able to update easily. Websites, depending on your platform, can be difficult, and while it can be customized, it may require a different skill set. So, how many of you update your website regularly? This is your responsibility. Okay, so about a little over half in the room. What I'll often hear is that we want to make it easy for the church staff to update, and so Facebook is easier. It doesn't require any technical skill, but it doesn't always equal better because you're limited in your scope. Facebook limits you to their tools, and I think this is a key part. I've got a number of examples coming up here. Facebook, for a while, was adding lots of new add-ons to their Facebook page, where you could have bring different apps to it and have sign-up forms and that. They've kind of moved away from that. It didn't really seem to take off as much for the average page. Some of the brands had customized apps, but with your website, you're really, again, limitless into what you can do. So a few things that you can add to your church website that make it a better experience for your users. Having a blog tied to your website creates this single experience, this cohesive experience for your users, where you have your regular information on your website and then your syndicated content for your blog. It could also be your podcast. I think I might have added that in. But if you're doing podcasts on a regular basis, blogs and podcasts I see in a very similar way. They're long format content. They're just put in a different medium. And so videos are an alternative to that too, a vlog if your church does that. How many of you at your churches have some kind of long format content, either blog, video, or audio? Okay, good. A handful of you. That's good. Do you keep that on your website right now? Good. I've seen some where it'll be on a third-party site like Medium or a separate WordPress blog apart from their website. Yeah.
In terms of like recorded sermons and things like that, would you consider that to be in terms of a long-form media, or would that be something separate?
It depends on how you have that stored. If you are doing it as more of a database where you can search and find that, I wouldn't put it in that. And sometimes you'll just have a sermon page where it's listed on a table with the dates and the titles. But you could put it in a more of a long format where the latest is always at the top. Maybe you add a little bit of additional background to it, so it's not just an archive, but it's more like a blog or a vlog where people are anticipating the next thing and you share it in that way. It's easy to just post it. In fact, that's how it is on our church's website. I'd love to change that process to make it more about new content as opposed to just here's our file folder of recordings for sermons. So then if you do it in that way, I'd put it in that blog kind of category. And we'll talk about where that fits in later on. Good. Any other questions before I move on? And please stop me as we go. We got plenty to cover, but there's enough time for all the questions. So forms is another thing that is much easier to put into your church website. We'll talk about the website being a home base, a place for conversions. Conversions not in the altar call sense, but a conversion as in a action that an individual completes. So registering for VBS, signing up for a new event, or signing up to receive the Lent devotions for the season. Forms are easily added to your website in a variety of different ways. We're trying to gain that kind of response from your customers, that's my language, from your audience on Facebook is difficult. There are ads where you can set up forms for completion so that you can receive that feedback that somebody is opting in to something or registering to an event, but it's a lot more difficult. The one exception would be signing up for events. Facebook has the events where you can indicate that you're going, which is good to see that interest, but to put it into a practical, tangible way. If you're seeing the contact information for everybody who signed up, getting an event registration on Facebook doesn't serve that practical need. So having forms on your website is a customization that is easy to implement and hard to do outside of the website. Your church calendar. I've seen churches try to use social media for their master church calendar, and it becomes very cluttered and excessive. If you have every single event in your church as a Facebook event, the notifications that go with that are exhausting. Whereas on your website, you can make it that destination for your church calendar, customize it for groups showing the different events that are relevant, and you don't have that ability within a social media account. So that creates your website as a destination with more regular updated content as well. Having your church directory on there. Having a list of members on your Facebook page, or if you're using a Facebook group, kind of serves this purpose, but there are a lot of tools available where your website could be that destination for your online church directory, with, of course, the appropriate permissions and security built in so that it's not publicly available. And that's the difference with a Facebook group, whereas a Facebook page, you could see who likes this in some sense, or see who's commenting on it. A group, you can see all the members, but on a church directory on your website, you can see all the relevant content information as well. So those are a few of the key customizations. I'm curious, are there any things on your websites right now that you have customized to meet a need that you couldn't meet on social media? Yes?
I guess we do live streaming for our services, but Facebook Live now is kind of
That does help that, yeah. I do know that for those, especially for shut-ins or people who are not active on Facebook and are used to turning to the church. I know in the old days, as a teenager, I got some volunteer hours by doing the recording services and having the VHSs that got passed on to the shut-ins. Turning to the church rather than social media is much more common for those older members. And so your website is a perfect place for that. Good.
How safe is the church directory if you put names, faces, and if you would have a school and a...
It really depends on the tool that you use. There's a number of them out there. On our platform, it's native to that, where it's only accessible if you are given a login. And I know that some of the other ones, I think mychurchdirectory.com is one of them, that you have to have a password to sign in. So if you're just doing static content posting on the website, that's not very secure at all, and I don't recommend that. But there's a variety of add-on tools, and that's where that customization with the website comes in, that you can choose which tool to use based on how it best suits your needs. Good.
The customization use of the calendars. Our master church calendar is simply a Google Calendar.
Absolutely.
And so that's very easy to throw onto our website. So
Exactly.
the church members are always looking at that because that's more up to date than anything else that we have. We do print out month by month our calendar in
Sure.
fun, pretty format and stuff.
But that's coming straight from Google still.
But it's all the events are coming straight from the Google Calendar, and all the office staff uses it. All of that.
Well, and that's the wonderful thing about Google Calendars too, is that they integrate into so many different web platforms that really, regardless of what you're using, you can either integrate it or create just a separate link to that public view. And yeah, when I think of master church calendars, I go to Google Calendars because it's just so easy to use and combine multiple ones.
We use it for a lot of documents, so you can get all your things that you need before a church meeting, and everybody can see them by clicking.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's another thing that it's not great with social media to upload documents. We talked in our last session as Facebook about WireHog, which is an idea that Mark Zuckerberg had at the beginning of Facebook that was kind of to compete with what would now be like Box and all of that. Social media is not the best place for sharing files, really because of the permissions and everything else. So good. All right, so the next one is to talk about focused attention. And I think this is a key thing. As we talk about your website, that is really the only platform that you can control the environment. So here's a nice picture of a cat. I was trying to find who originally had this quote, and in my research I found that it was really a tribute to many different people, so I didn't put anybody on it. But this idea of now in the age of social media, we are competing with cat pictures. That is, when you think about your church announcements and putting it up in line with cat pictures and things that families and friends are sharing, you're going to lose every time. So here's another example.
Combine the two.
Say again?
Let's combine
Combine your
picture
with your manager, with your shirt. A church playing or a cat playing in the front lawn of the church. There you go. Say again? Cat named Luther. Here's another example of this, and this will get into a personal example. So when you think about sharing information from your church, you may want to be more friendly and share pictures of your pastors. And so my question is, would you rather see this or something like this? This is my adorable daughter, Melody. And again, you're competing against people's personal interests. So your church is obviously personal, but the upcoming sausage supper is not nearly as engaging as the picture of your family. And that's where you're coming. And so as you're looking at competing attention, this pastor, as well intentioned as he is going to lose every time. So this nice chart, and it's from Global Web Index, I think is very helpful when you start looking at intents of people on Facebook. And so the number one thing on there is to stay in touch with what friends are doing. Now, number two benefits us in some way to stay up to date with news and current events if we consider our church part of the news and current events. But as you're talking about the global news, again, that's another distraction that social media brings. And there's a benefit of social media where it all fits in one spot, and that's great for individuals. It's bad for those who are sharing information because, again, it's your competing interests. You'll see this in social media has affected this in a variety of other communication channels. You look at television and commercials. How many people watch commercials anymore if they can't fast forward through them? If you're not fast forwarding through a commercial, you're looking at your phone during those times. And that's where TV advertisers are really struggling right now because it's, again, divided attention. So, yes?
There was a phase that some websites, church websites, went through a while back in putting on regular news, that would update once in a while, right on their church website.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen that so much recently.
Like a widget that would show CNN or something like that.
It was to bring people to your website to watch regular news as well as your church.
Yeah, and it's been a little while. Other websites did this too, where they essentially were trying to make your website be the individual's homepage. And so posting weather on there, news feeds, other things, so that you just save that as your homepage. And that is definitely a trend that has moved away because it wasn't really effective. And what it also did was it skewed the analytical data. So you may have been getting lots of visits to your homepage, but it didn't turn into anything because it was just a destination. So I would recommend against that because then you're bringing the same problem of divided attention right into the place where you want their full attention. But yeah, that is a trend that was around for a little while, and I didn't see it as much on church pages, although some, as I did on other media outlets for trying to put everything on the one page. So yeah, that's something to worry about or to avoid at this point. Yeah, some of these other things we can leverage as the church. As you think about filling up spare time, I mean, that's almost 40% of that. What kind of engaging content can we share on social media to help fill up that spare time? We can leverage this channel and leverage the desired results without taking away from our goals as a church. All right, so how do you compete against family and friends? Well, really, you can't. And you're never going to win that battle, even as the church where it's far more personal. The purpose of Facebook is different than websites, and that's a key point, is that they are meant for different intentions of the user. And we're going to talk about that more as we get into search. So before I go too far, any other thoughts or questions related to divided attention? Do you see this yourself as you're using social media, that you're not able to focus on any one thing? It's much more about the collection of news. I know that's what I see. I feel very scatterbrained when I start getting onto some of the, Facebook especially, as you're having ads and other things too. Let's talk about search engine optimization. And I've led whole courses on this. This is just an abbreviation of that. But I'll throw out some statistics for you. Between 40 and 60 billion searches happen on Google every month. That's a staggering number. And the reason for that's continuing to increase is that Google is changing from just being google.com in search and all of the other ways of searching, moving into, phones and voice search and home devices and all of that. They're also leveraging other sites so that their searches on their sites are using Google's network. And when you talk in the world of search, Google is really the only one you talk about. There's certainly other search engines like Bing and Yahoo, but they don't really warrant a mention because they're so minuscule compared to Google, and Google sets the trends. 82% of all searches go through Google, so that is that entire market share. So that's something that points to just why you don't worry about any of the other search engines. But this is the key about searches. 66% of distinct search queries resulted in one or more clicks on Google search results. The difference between social media and Google comes to the attention and what they're planning on doing. They're planning on clicking on something. They're searching for information, and this is where your church website shows up. We'll look at a few examples of that in a moment. So you'll say, well, doesn't Facebook show up in searches too? Like, your website is not the only thing showing up in there. And here's an example of searching for searching specifically for our church to show on the news feed or on the search results. So if you search for Salem Lutheran Church in Afton, you will get Facebook in the results. First and foremost is your church website, and then comes Facebook. So Facebook definitely has SEO value. You're not eliminating your presence from Google searches by just relying on a Facebook page, but you'll notice the key difference is that it's an improved listing. So I'll zoom in a little bit here and show what the website listing looks like. Of course, Google's intention is for you to click. Everything they do is to help you get to the right information that you're looking for. And so they've built in these automated tools that websites can leverage to give even more information. So when you search for a church, Google's going through and finding what sublinks to share. And they're doing this automatically. There's tools that can help you dictate that a little bit, but they get to decide, and that's based completely off of their algorithms to say, okay, there's valuable information further in. People who searched end up going to this page. And so it's all around leveraging the information that you put on your website to share it with the users. Whereas with Facebook, you're always going to get this, and that's it. You're not going to get your subpages, you're not going to get your post, you're just going to get your main page. And of course, it always puts Facebook in there. You don't get to dictate how that listing looks. So the improved listings is a key part of that. But there's also more listing opportunities too. And this is, as we talk search engine optimization, in the traditional sense, SEO is referring to things you can do to improve your website to appear in Google. But I think a key thing that's often missed that websites can leverage is all of the other listing opportunities. So when we talk about that kind of search engine results page, we're talking about organic results. Organic is in contrast to paid. So organic results always get the best clicks. You can certainly, and we'll show paid in a second, you'll certainly get clicks from page, but people are not fooled by the fact that there are ads in Google. They're not surprised by the fact that there are ads. Google makes it very clear what's paid and what's not. And these organic listings are always the best. If you're not on page number 1, it's really not even worth it. You know, the percentage of people that click on pages on 2 and 3 just continually drop. So being on the top of the page and having a larger presence is going to bring in that traffic to your website. There are paid ads, and I do recommend the churches utilize Google AdWords so that they are always up at the top. Because if you are in a larger market where there's more churches available, you're competing against traffic to theirs as well. And so your church, for searches like churches in St. Louis, my church doesn't come up at the top. We're far from the largest church, far from the most active. We don't get to show up in the top of the listings, but ads allows us to get farther up. And so that is one way of doing it. Google Ads is a complicated tool with a steep learning curve, and it can be expensive, but you do get to dictate those prices. And so I recommend looking into that and taking advantage of that if you are in a highly competitive market for search. If you are in a smaller town and there's 3 churches in that little area, you're going to show up much more easily than in a larger geographic area. There's also this local knowledge graph, and you probably saw that on the listing for my church's site as well. Google, again, is trying to get you to click on something that is valuable to you. And so the search result that they think is best is going to show up in much greater detail on the far right of those screens. And they've found that those are very highly clicked. For one, it draws your eye to it more by bringing in pictures and maps and all that. But that is not a search listing that you can pay for. That is done through Google My Business, which is really tied in with Google Maps. And it's easy to shy away from that as a church to say, okay, well, I'm not a business, that I don't belong there. But think about it as a business listing, very similar to what you would put in Yellow Pages. You know, you're putting your church out there, and this is a free tool where you can log in and update your relevant information. It's very similar, actually, to the information that you would put in Facebook Pages, and the more complete it is, the better you're going to show up on there. So you'll notice that there's pictures. We'll get into that in just a second. The local pack is similar to Google My Business, in that if there are many different listings that meet that, Google will show this kind of display. And I'm sorry, I know it's small on the screen, but a map with those different listings. This is going to be far more common for churches in my area. You know, if there's enough listings where they can show it on the map, that's what they're going to go to. And again, your visibility is based on how you update on Google My Business. So, how many of you are familiar with Google My Business? Just a handful. That would be maybe a first step. If you want to get more visibility to your website, log into Google My Business, set that up. Again, that part is free. You're just updating it. And chances are they already have a listing for you right now based on publicly available information, and they're choosing how to display it. So another nice thing about that is that you can set your hours. And so if your church office is going to be closed for a holiday, you can update that. If for some reason times are changing, you can update that in your site too. So now people can suggest edits to your listing, and by having Google My Business, you can review those edits and update them. So that's a nice thing too. If somebody is trying to say, actually you're on this address, but your formal address is something else, you can maintain that in there. All right, other types of search engine results. You have images, which is key. Now, it's important to review how your images are named so that they show up in search results. Google will take the context of the image, but if it doesn't have enough context, it'll look at the name of the file. And so if you have a picture of your church on your website and you have it named Front of Church, that's not going to show up when they search for your church name. But if you name your file church name with city and state in there, that'll show up in Google image results. And so when they're searching for your church, that's another type of result that can show up. And again, it's creating a larger presence on those search engine results pages. Videos is another thing. Google owns YouTube, and YouTube is actually the second largest search engine. So making sure there's some videos with your church's information on there there. Having a welcome video on your church website that's hosted on YouTube gives you that larger presence. Yes?
Going back to the images, one of the problems that we have is our church is named St. John's. So we get St. John's from Florida on our search hits and other pictures of other churches. How can we minimize that?
You can minimize that by having more options on there. So if you improve the value of your images that are more specific, that'll help. Putting in the city and state in the image name is going to be key. It's amazing how many church websites I've been to that don't highlight the city and state right at the front, that don't put that into their title. Doesn't give Google the context of that. So the user who's searching, Google usually has the context of their geographic location. If they're going to search for a St. John's, it's going to try to pull the ones that are closest to them. So making sure that you see your brand as not just St. John's Lutheran Church, but St. John's Lutheran Church in your city and state.
So it's
too.
not just being specific with website names, it's being specific with everything.
Yep, file names, all of that. Absolutely. And another thing that you can do with that as well, Google looks at the code. There's a thing called alt text. It used to be a much more important thing from a practical standpoint. When dial-up connections were common and images were loading, you would put this alt text to show, okay, this image that is slowly downloading is this, and it'll show up in there. Now it's used for search results. It's used for screen readers as well, for those who are visually impaired, to tell what that is. That's a great way to take advantage of Google image search by adding more attributes to that image using the things that Google is reviewing. So it's in the code, it's just alt equals, and then you put in your string. In most web platforms, they'll give you a place to put in that alt text. So that's another way to make sure Google knows this is the church that you're looking for. So, but again, if you're just putting in the basic stuff, front of church, inside of church, that's not going to help you at all. So being very intentional. So, and the same with the videos too. If you name the video welcome video, it's not going to show up. But if you say welcome video for St. John's Lutheran Church, that'll show up more. So being very intentional on those things is going to help your search results. Brand knowledge graph. This is something that is maybe not as important for churches, but could give you one more step. Having a Wikipedia page, or in this case it's Wikimedia, they're tied together, to show more information about your brand, in this case your church name. Especially if you have an older church that has a lot of historical information, telling the story that you might put on an About Us page on a Wikipedia page gives you one more opportunity for search results. And Google looks at that different than a typical web page. The structured content shows up differently. So this one is probably not as likely to show up if you have a good presence everywhere else, but it's one more opportunity for you. So I wouldn't go running out and making your first step creating a Wikipedia page, but if you have some information that's relevant to share, go ahead and do that. And lastly, this one is an interesting one, the rich answers. This is based on how you optimize your site. There's schema that you could put together that gets rather complicated. I think it's schema.org where you can go and see. It helps you customize search results based on your context. So churches don't really have a set of schema. Movies theaters have schema for like movie times. Restaurants have schema for like menu items on that to really customize the type of results in there. The kind that you should focus on though, and even if you're not getting into the code, but just how you write your content, is question and answers. These are really SEO gold when you can, somebody searches something like, what are the times for Salem Lutheran Church? And it can pull up as a question and answer sort of thing. It's also what voice devices are searching for as well. And so as voice search continues to grow in use, providing answers to questions show up. And most search queries are just that, they're questions. So there's a variety of other types of results that I don't think are relevant to church websites that I left out of this, but just know that Google search results pages are no longer just listings of pages. There's so much more. It's all about information. All right, so not only does Google provide the platform for people to find you, they provide you with the tools for doing a better job with this. So if you're not familiar with these, my goal is that you can at least learn a little bit about this, maybe set up an account and go farther. Google Search Console It used to be called Google Webmaster Tools, and it gives you more insight into how people are using or finding your site through organic search. Google is very careful about how much they share with that because they don't want to give away too much of their algorithm. But this provides a way, so you could upload your sitemap to this. This shows you what Google has indexed. If you have pages on your site that you don't really want to have displayed in search engine result pages, like sign-in pages, things that just aren't relevant, you could ask Google to remove that from the index here. You can also go into those quick links that I showed before. If you have something that shows up under there that's really not relevant, not necessarily bad information, but if one of the more popular pages was Lent 2017 and that shows up on the Google search result pages, you may not want that to be a sublink because it's no longer relevant. You can ask Google to deprioritize that on Search Console. So it's a free tool. All of these things from Google are free, and it's good to get that set up. It does require a code added to your site. So if you don't have access to the code, you may need to speak with somebody. Google My Business, what I recommended before, you can see how that's set up. This is just a quick view of our site. There's some things that you may not need to put in that are business related, but it at least allows you to give some more info in there and see what people say. If people are putting reviews up, you can see those in here as well. So that's another free tool. And then the big one out of all of this, Google Analytics. How many of you are familiar with Google Analytics? Good, a handful. This is the number one analytics tool to understand your website. If, again, it's completely free. You can find out your amount of traffic, where people are coming from, what they're doing on your site, who your audience is. It's leveraging Google's data that they know about not only your website, but your visitors, and providing it to you in a reportable fashion. There are other fancy web analytics software that's out there. Adobe has one that's like 6 figures. It's certainly not worth it for a church to go and pay for an analytics software when Google Analytics is free. That also requires you to put a code on your site. So if you haven't already done analytics, go in and do analytics and Search Console at the same time. If you're going with AdWords, they all tie together. So tons of great information. You can even see exactly how many people are on your site right now, what pages they're on, and where they're from. It's kind of cool and creepy at the same time. You can't see their names, but you can see that they're looking at this page. All right, so the goal of the user is the primary customer of both Facebook and Google. I wrote that wrong as I'm saying that out loud now. It sounded really good when I wrote it. Customer is not probably the right word. So the goal of the end user is everything that Google and Facebook are revolving around. The goal of getting the right information at the right way. Now for Google, it's all based on intentional searches, whereas Facebook is all built on staying on Facebook and keeping them engaged and entertained. And so it's very different. Facebook and Google will do whatever they can to keep their customers satisfied. So I'll have to figure out how to rephrase that. All right, so before I move on, any questions about search engine optimization and that? Yes? Yes, for a variety of ways. So it used to be that the 3 key meta tags were title, description, and keywords. Many years ago, they dropped keywords as something that they looked at because people have used it. What meta tags are is hidden code on your website that gives Google information about your site. And so keywords used to be a thing, and you could say, okay, what things are important on here? I want this page to show up for these keywords. It's been probably 10 years or more that they dropped support for that because people would just post in all the popular keywords so their website would show up. And people are gaming the system. Google now penalizes for lots of keywords. So I recommend not even worrying about keywords at all. Title and description are important. That's what shows up in the Google search results. Now description doesn't have any impact on your SEO. It doesn't change where your page shows up on the search, but it does show up on the page. And so right write your descriptions for individuals, not for Google. In fact, that's really the key. Google has changed, or is updated as much as possible to focus on providing the intentions of the users. So if you're providing relevant information in a readable fashion for users, that benefits Google. The title tag is good because it shows up in search results, and there's a little bit of SEO value in there too. So that would be what I'd focus on first and foremost, at least for SEO. There's some things for social media that you might want to do as well, called Open Graph. It's basically the Facebook equivalent of meta tags. But yeah, for search results, those are the two that I would look at, title and description. So yes.
You mentioned using Google AdWords. Do you have like suggestions for common AdWords for churches to use, like Lutheran churches near me? Or, like, what are some good ideas for that?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I would definitely do your church name and city and state. Like, if people are searching for your specific church, first and foremost, you want to show up on that. If you don't have good SEO value built in, if you're not showing up top in organic search, having that in there, and then start going a little bit broader from there. So, churches in my community. Churches near me probably isn't a good one to do, but you can use Google's tools to do geographic searches or limit that. So if you are doing churches near me, make sure you have that geographic component in there as well. But yeah, Lutheran churches, I think one thing that is going to be most valuable is if you go deeper into your ministries. So like we have a cancer care support ministry at my church. We want to show up for people looking for that. They may not type in church, but it's meeting their individual needs, something they're searching for. So cancer support groups. If you have a preschool, preschools and all those keywords that go with that, targeting geographic areas will be key. The more honed in you can get on what the intentions are, the better. Because certainly you want to get in there for churches near me, but the way to reach a larger audience is for those who are searching for a need that you're meeting at your church that is not just the fact that you're a church. Does that make sense? Yeah, so reviewing what benefits you can provide to individuals and setting up keywords for that. And I'm not going to lie, it's going to be a lot of work, but the benefits of that are that when people are actively seeking out something you're already providing, you're there. So, good question. Any other questions related to SEO before we move on to the next one? Cool. All right. Controlled environment. So your website is the only platform that you control the entire environment. Changes from Facebook are key, and some of them are just annoying and some of them really impact what you have. So I put this up here. Anytime that I start, probably on an annual basis, I start searching for sizes of images for Facebook. If you've ever tried adding an image to Facebook and having it be askew or cropped out, Facebook and their platform will change preferred images, it seems like every 6 months or so. And so this is one of the latest ones. But there's a number of different places to put it, and because there's so many different devices, it's hard to get it just right. You don't have to worry about other requirements for images and the way you structure your data on your website. It's just what you want it to be. Whereas here, you have to pay attention to all of that. It's getting a little loud in there. I'm sorry I'm not as exciting as that presentation. The other big thing is algorithm changes, and I shared this in the last session. I didn't put the fiery background that I did here. This recent changes on Facebook's news feed, some are calling it Facebook Zero, Facebook Armageddon, Facebook Apocalypse. They're basically stripping any kind of organic visibility in the news feed for Facebook pages. It was really low at like 10% of your audience. Now it's even lower than that. Those changes happen regularly on Facebook, and they change what they prioritize in terms of types of content. You don't have to worry about that as much with your website. Now, actually, I should have, where was it? Yeah, website, I'll go back to the pay-to-play. Websites are not immune to algorithm changes. Like I talked about Google having those different algorithm changes that affect where you show in search rankings. Google does change that regularly. It's just not to the same impact as social media because there's so many types of things that people engage with on Facebook, whereas Google, with it being intent on search, intentions don't change as much as entertainment preferences. So let me go back a little bit. The other thing is the pay-to-play. Social media and Facebook specifically is becoming much more about, if you want to have a presence in the news feed, you have to pay to play, and Facebook ads is a key part of that. Google has that as well, where you are paying for AdWords, and that's why I recommend you do AdWords. It's been more stable though. They made a change about a year ago where they took off the side column and just have a single stream of results with, I think, 4 now at the top and nothing else competing with it. So it's a little bit more straightforward, whereas with Facebook the ads are mixed in between there. So you do have that in both. To check how Google is doing things, Moz, M-O-Z, is a great, is kind of the leaders in understanding SEO. They have what they call Mozcast, which is a weather forecast to say, okay, how much is how much is Google changing their algorithm? And they track all of the different things for rankings. So that's a good way to see it. There's regular changes in there, and this will tell you if things get really bad, if all of a sudden something that used to be ranking high is no longer ranking high anymore. So it's still a concern, but not as much on Google. So Facebook groups, what about that? Is that a better way of addressing this so that the newsfeed algorithm changes don't affect it? And absolutely. Facebook groups, and you can see here, Lutheran Communicators is one of my favorite groups. There's those show up in my newsfeed, and that's a great way to have a presence in your audience's newsfeed, but it's built much more on interactions and less on information. And so that's really a different kind of approach than what you get with your website with sharing information, publishing that. Yeah, I also shared this because of the image on there. You'll see that the image is skewed. It cuts off the L and the O-R-R-S at the end. That's one of those image challenges that we have. So I need to let Seth Hins know that he's got to update that. So groups are great for community, but not outreach. Talked about that a lot in my last session, but when you think about websites compared to social media pages, your new audience is going to be far more, your content's going to be far more accessible to new audiences on your website than in Facebook groups, because those are all about community and private communication. So that's the value of the websites for reaching new audiences, and that's where we're going next, is the actual reach. So not everyone is on Facebook. I know, isn't that surprising? It's a vast majority of people, but there's still a large segment that doesn't trust Facebook or social media. And that's becoming less. Certainly on the older side of demographics, more and more older adults are on Facebook than ever before. And then there's the reputation that younger people are not on Facebook as well. But as I was doing the research, I think that's a little bit over-exaggerated when you look at 88% of people 18 to 29 use Facebook. Instagram and Snapchat are very big for younger generations, but Facebook is still very common, especially in the audiences that most churches are targeting. Most church communications are not going out to kids 18 and under. It's going to that older one. So I think that's exaggerated that young people aren't using it. You look at some of these other numbers, 84, 72, 62% of 65 years and older, and this is from last April, so it's a little dated. But that still shows there's a large audience that's not on there. And as people are searching for your church, their intention is always going to be going through search engines first, or not always, but it's more often going to be through a search engine than through a social media account.
Even those numbers are skewed when you consider the usages and the time spent.
Oh, absolutely.
For all those ages too.
You got it, yeah. Because
my grandmother uses it for catching up with pictures of her grandchildren, not for
everything else. That's a very good point. When you think about the reliance on that, how common is that? Yeah, it does skew it as well. Now, I do want to caution with this. So Snapchat, we can talk about how the perception is that more and more young people are moving from Facebook to Snapchat and Instagram. It's very much valuable for them keeping in touch with friends. It's not for gaining information, but they do use it regularly. So 88% of students use Instagram and Snapchat, 81% use Facebook, and then some of the other ones are using Twitter. But it still shows that Facebook is really close with that, so there's value there. It's still not everyone. But I think the important thing is for you to monitor this yourself. If you're using social media regularly, check out the statistics that they provide. This is just an example. And it shows your demographics, who is visiting your Facebook page. Take a look at this, compare it with your audience in your congregation, with your demographics in your congregation, and see if it aligns. If that is the trend of your church, then that shows you're probably getting them more with Facebook, or getting the majority with Facebook. But if that doesn't match what the demographics of your congregation are, that shows you that missing point that you have. So it's I come from Missouri, the show me state. I think it's very important to take a look at the actual data for your church to see, is your reach what you expect it to be there, whereas knowing that your website is accessible for everyone. All right, so I mentioned this a little bit before. It may sound like I'm very down on social media, and I'm definitely not. I think that every church should be active on Facebook. Every church worker should be active on Facebook. Social media has its place in communications, and it's a very important place. It's just not the same place as websites. So I want to introduce a content framework here. If you were in my session yesterday, I talked through this as well, but I think this is really going to be the important part of understanding the value of a website in the age of social media. I learned this framework from Chris Brogan, a speaker who speaks on communication in a variety of ways, and it really clicked for me when I started thinking about all of my communication activities, my marketing activities at work, my communications activities at church, and it fits for me. So you have these 3 stages. The first one is your outpost, and this is your conversations. This is farther away from all of your information, where you are. This is where everybody else is. And social media is great for your outpost. That's where people are spending their time. That's where their attention is. There needs to be that presence there. But it doesn't fit some of these other needs that we talked about before. So your media empire is your next one. These are your long format contents like your blog, your podcast, your videos. It's great to share that on social media, but to house that should be closer to home, where you can control that environment, where you can gain the additional value of doing that. And ultimately, your home base is where you have your conversions, where your audience is taking the actions that you're wanting, whether that's signing up for events or sharing additional information, opting into things at your church. So here's a different example of how you could look at that on its side. So again, your social media channels, even your search efforts, your paid search efforts, what you're doing for SEO, really go on that far outside of things, because it's where your audience is. It's farther away from your church, but it's drawing them in. And so that's where conversations happen. And you may think that search is not really a conversation, but when you look at it as a query and a response, that's a two-way dialogue, even though your end of that conversation is automated. On the social media side, certainly it can be an active conversation. Media empire, things like blog, even emails. Emails I see as more long format than social media. That's where you convey your content, all bringing it down to your website, your home base of all your communications, you're drawing them in. And so as we look at campaigns that we do, and it fits in exactly with the church, you are getting attention, getting conversation going farther away, you're bringing them closer through valuable content, and you're getting some kind of commitment or conversion on your church website. And that's really where the value for each of those is. So if you try to have your website be everything for outside interactions, you're going to miss the point. And if you try to have your social media platform be your home base for all communication, it's going to fall short of what you need. So that is the gist of my presentation. I'd love to hear what questions you have, and then I have a few resources to show after that. But before I go off the screen, any questions about this content framework? Nothing at all. Good. Yeah.
Have you ever had just encouragement by church members to go to Google and review the church, things like that?
I haven't asked others. I've been kind of embarrassed some of ours. I don't control our presence at this point, and so we have a lot of shortcomings. The nice thing is that Google tries to overcome that as much as possible by showing things themselves. If you're not controlling it, they'll take the lead and show it. But yeah, I think that's a good practice to just have your own church members say, okay, imagine you were not a member here. What would this experience be like for you if you go searching for a church? So that's a very good suggestion. Yeah.
What kind of suggestions do you have as far as how much content on your website is tailored to guests looking for you versus members who want committee meeting minutes and think that's a great idea to have that out there for everybody in the world, right? Like, how do you balance how much content for different audiences you're putting on the website? Because obviously both groups are using it.
Right.
But do you have any recommendations on that?
It depends on your platform. Many platforms will allow you to have a members-only section where you have to sign in to view that. And I highly recommend that because, for one, it allows you to put more sensitive information up there. So things like phone numbers or birthdates or prayer requests that don't get indexed by Google, that don't show up in search results, that require username and password to access that. And so if you have that capability, then you can really distinguish it on your site to say, okay, everything publicly available is what I want the non-members to see. And anything that I want members to see, I'll put behind that members-only site. And then you don't have to limit your scope as much because you have that option of privacy on there. And so you can really build out your members-only to be as detailed as you need it to be, and then focus your public site to be all about potential visitors, potential members on there. And then, I mean, like in everything, you focus on what's most relevant. The history of your church is only relevant for non-members in the context of telling about who your church is. You don't have to put all of that in for potential members. You can focus events that you may be inviting members to, but change the context of it for potential members to go into a little bit more detail, to use external language, not your internal church lingo. So tailoring that message for those specific audience, that's the key of having that mixed platform. If you don't have a platform that allows you to have members-only information, then I think you walk a very careful line of where you put it in the navigation. Maybe your navigation has a section for members that may be publicly available but isn't highlighted on your homepage, that isn't top level of your navigation. And that way you have the ability to direct your members to go there. Remember, go up to upcoming events and members only section or members section and direct them there. But by and large, your website should focus on that potential guest because that's where you're going to gain the most value for it. Does that answer your question? Cool. Good. What other questions? Here, and then I'll come over.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Is there anything to be said for, I know that, the website is definitely important, but once you get to that website, colors, content, are there rules as far as, like how many words, et cetera, that, gets people's attention?
There's a lot of best practices out there, and I think more than anything, it should be reflective of your church and relevant to your audience. So from, like I mentioned in the beginning, a branding perspective, the look and feel of your website should match the experience that somebody walking into your church would have. So don't use stock photos of people. If you are not a very diverse congregation, don't put diverse stock photos on your website and give the wrong impression. If you are not a young congregation, don't put a bunch of pictures of youth on there and young families if that's not the real nature of your congregation. Again, to the tone of it. If you're a very contemporary congregation, you can have a more contemporary looking website. But if it's much more liturgical, traditional, it should reflect that as well. It should be much more subdued and, again, reflect the reality of your congregation. From, like you said, page length and colors, there's a lot of a lot of independent research that are not tied to churches, but just on what colors play play well, how formats affect it. Things like basic stuff like don't use underline for emphasis. Underline is reserved for hyperlinks. Little things like that would be really far in the weeds, and there's lots of resources out there that designers put together. There's some of that does impact SEO, like where you put headers and all that. Even proper desktop publishing fits into website publishing as well in terms of the structure. So that's a really long question that it could have an even lengthier answer, but there's a lot of resources out there. In fact, I'll show this at this time too, so you guys can take this down. Our blog will, we've got a lot of content on those kind of things. Pardon me. Hopefully I didn't break that. We've got a number of different topics related to that. Our blog is concordiatechnology.org/blog, and we have outside writers come in and provide some of these more specific posts about that. And then you can find it all in our resource center up in the top right. We'll have that broken down. One of those sections under communication is websites. And so we'll have things like font combination or color palettes and that. So that could give you some helpful advice there too. So cool. You had a question, then we'll go to the back.
We're on the jump off of redesigning our website.
Mm-hmm.
What's a good platform? We have been on Squarespace, and it's been very clunky. So
Sure.
what are good ones?
Well, that's a loaded question for me because we sell a website platform called Church 360 Unite. So I certainly recommend you take a look at that. But there's plenty of others out there depending on your needs and your budget. I think WordPress is the most common platform because it's so flexible. And it can be a little bit difficult to set up, but there's so many plugins available you can extend the reach really far with that. So those are the two that I would mention right off front. It really depends on your needs, your budget, your capabilities from a tech standpoint. Squarespace is a very good one. They've got a lot of nice designs. They're very compatible for mobile, but if it's clunky to use, you may need something a little bit simpler than that. And we built Unite to be for those very novice church workers who have no web coding experience, just like writing an email. So it doesn't work for the most advanced technical sites, but it works really well for the average church website.
You also mentioned My Church.
I think it's My Church Directory. Yeah, that's one that some of our customers have mentioned before, and it's just a nice directory app. We provide in Unite a member directory in there that's native to it, but yeah, there's a few others that I've seen that some will be the same company that prints your directory will have an online version for it. So there's a variety of different solutions out there. Yeah, sure. Yes. Oh, that's okay. Oh. That's right. What's your, yes, sir?
Yeah, one of the problems we have is we let one of our members usually do the website, but one of our members moves on. And they've used WordPress. Some of us novices have no clue as to what to do. We have another young girl just graduated with a social media degree. She's working on it now to redesign it under Wix, is it?
Wix is one of those providers, yep.
But now she's thinking about moving to get another job, and there's nobody. I don't have the time to learn it. My wife's the director of the preschool. She wants a web page or connected to ours. How can we maintain a web page when we don't know the first thing about it?
Well, I think that comes down to your platform first and foremost, and we'll see that a lot where somebody with the skills takes advantage of a platform like WordPress and really builds it up, but doesn't put a succession plan in place. And so, that's a key thing. One of the things we do with Unite is make it so simple that you can use it regardless of what your skill level is. It's restricted for some of the advanced designers who are used to the full customization, but it allows for anybody to go in and update it.
Do you have somebody that works with you when you do it?
We do, and we provide additional training. So we have a full onboarding experience. So we have our onboarding specialists will walk through the training one-on-one with your church and anybody who needs that, and then our support team can answer questions from there, and we offer regular training. So that's why we take that approach, because we've seen it so many times. I mean, I've seen it in my own church where somebody ups and leaves, and then everybody's kind of at a loss. And what you end up doing is a full redesign redesign, because that helps you understand it when you may not have even needed a redesign. So yeah, that succession plan is key, and that's like that in anything in the church. I mean, if you've had a VBS director who ups and leaves, and somebody's starting from scratch, it's so much harder than having a plan in place. So websites just add that technical component that makes it more difficult to move forward. So good.
Is there any way to pay to get rid of ads on Facebook?
No.
I hate the ads.
I know. You can't pay to get rid of them. What you can do, and I've been, and some days I'm more diligent than others, but if I see ads that annoy me or frustrate me, you can click the X on them and tell Facebook, I don't like this ad. This isn't interesting to me. And what you're telling Facebook is, I'm not going to click on that, so don't even bother showing it to me. And then they'll try to tailor your ad experience to things that you will want. It just changes it to a different ad. I know, but there is no way to get out of ads on Facebook. I know.
You can download, depending on what browser you use, you can download an ad blocker. That's what I use. I use AdBlock Plus is a popular one, and then there's another one I can't remember the name, but I actually use the other one. I don't remember the name.
Does that work on Facebook?
Every time I access Facebook on like a mobile device, because I use a lot of it on desktop, every time I get on there, I'm like, oh, there's ads here. Like,
okay.
I notice no ads.
Well, that's good.
On these things, and it's also actually a security. It helps keep you more secure. Because
sure.
A lot of malware gets served through bad ads.
Through bad ads,
so
yeah.
It's part of, we make it standard practice. All our computers, we put that on.
Well, and that's a really good thing, and I heard that those don't work as well on social media as they do on websites. But if it's working for you, then yeah.
Mobile is the tricky part. Now Apple has started allowing some of it into mobile, but it's harder on mobile because the platform is not as robust or customized.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, as a marketer, I don't have ad blockers on me. I actually don't mind seeing ads as long as they're relevant to me. And that's where I often go and customize my preferences, because I do find out things about ads. But again, I'm a marketer. I'm on the bad side of the equation. So, yes. You had another question over here.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Which is Church 360 Unite?
There's a variety of different plans. If you want to stick around, I can give you some additional information on that. Yeah, I don't want to make this into a sales pitch, but I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. So good. Well, my contact information on here. Thank you very much for coming. I hope it gave you a better appreciation of the value of a church website today, and also the value of social media and where that role is, because it is extremely important. It just serves a different purpose than websites. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.